Like businesses that get funding fail almost as often as those that don't. You have to wonder, like, why do we keep doing this? And the reason is psychological pressure. People will come up to you and say, how much money have you raised if you have a startup? And it was tough to be like, well, actually, we're bootstrapping. I advise people in the book to respond with, well, actually, we don't have anything raised, but we're profitable and we have this many employees. Like, focus on other things that are actually meaningful. And when you start to buy into this hype, these startup myths, the mythology around startup, then you start to make decisions that aren't optimal. In fact, they're actively, in some cases, bad for your business because you just think that's what you ought to be. And I always say to people, don't pursue validation among your peers. Pursue validation in the market.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is David Sinkinson. How are you doing, David?
I'm absolutely great. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
You are welcome. David, is there a particular book you enjoyed reading?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I'm a little bit weird. My favorite books are business books. Like that's like my preferred genre. I don't just do it for like professional development. I actually do it for fun. And I think my favorite book would probably be The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It ended up being incredibly important in the foundation of my business. We even gave a copy of the book to every new employee. So that's like my go-to favorite book.
Excellent. Oh, I can understand that because sometimes when you're running your own business, you don't really have the time to muck about sometimes. So you just want to keep on learning, keep on growing. So I totally get that. So, David, tell me a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, some people can tell right away, but I'm Canadian. So I guess I have a Canadian accent. I started a company, a SaaS company, so software as a service company in public safety, up here in Canada. And I actually founded the business with my brother. We bootstrapped the business, so no venture capital funding or anything like that. And we were in kind of a weird space. Effectively, if you went to university or college in North America or the United States or Australia or Europe, there's this on-campus safety infrastructure called blue light poles. So this big pole, you can press it when you're in an emergency and you can get help.
That sounds really cool, that does.
Yeah, well, the thing was, though, is that those poles on occasion don't always work. So there was a need to kind of fill the gap. And so I was in the right place at the right time. I was working with the Associate Dean of Student Affairs at my school, and our mobile app basically, I pitched the idea of a mobile app where you can press a button and it would call the campus security group and also show your position in real time on a map that the dispatchers could see at the organization. So a very simple application started there, and then it grew to over 50 different features, including emergency notifications. So if there's a big emergency on campus, to sort of proactive safety features. If I'm walking home, I could send my location to a friend, and much, much more. And we ended up working with over 350 organizations and had millions of end users.
That is more than impressive. That's amazing.
Yeah. And our story also, and we can get to this, but our story also ends where my brother and I actually sold the business for $40 million. And it was kind of a big moment. And then it kind of left me in this limbo. And now I've written a book called Startup Different, where I'm trying to basically pay it forward to my entrepreneurial peers.
Brilliant. That sounds good. I wonder, though, I've always wondered about people that sell their businesses, because I think it's one thing when you set up a business to exit at X point. So like your plan is always to leave. Mm-hmm. But if you've not had that plan and your plan was like to solve a problem or you're passionate and then you sell it, did you say you felt a bit bereft? You felt like you'd lost something?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is like a noted phenomenon. The only problem is it's like you have very little sympathy, right? You sold your business for a lot of money. So people aren't exactly like, oh, poor you, But there is definitely an identity loss that occurs once you've sold your business. And this definitely happened to my brother and I, my co-founder. And it definitely left us in sort of a weird place, kind of wondering what we're doing here, like what our identities were professionally, and to some extent, even personally. I mean, a lot of time entrepreneurs, obviously, you identify, it's a personal thing about you as well, that what you're doing is a little bit different. And But to the first part of your question, I want to mention too is that there's lots of reasons why you might sell a business, and obviously one of them is financial. But one of the other things for me was that the company that was acquiring us was about 10 times larger,
Right.
and I felt that they could take what we were doing, which was helping people be safer, and they could amplify that impact, 10 times. Like we could suddenly reach people that we just wouldn't have been able to reach or would have taken a really, really long time. So there was a lot of different benefits, but I think for me on sort of an altruistic level, it was very nice that we were able to help more people by selling our business.
Yeah, and I suppose that's different because it's not just about the money. It is
Right.
about actually fulfilling the whole point of the business in the first place.
That's right. Like any good company, there's lots of companies out there, and they come of different shapes and sizes and qualities. But I would say that any company worth its merit is one that's a mission-driven organization. They're doing something to help make the world a better place, and in some cases, that's very niche and very specific. And that was in our case, for instance, who here like thinks about the public safety market like that often? But we knew we could make the lives of people on these campuses safer. Knew we could make the people working on those campuses as campus police and campus security, we could make their lives better. And we leaned in on that. And we never really, of course, you kind of fantasize, oh, what if I sold the business one day? But it was not a priority. Our priority was out there helping people and making a difference.
That's fantastic. All right, then. So let's look at some of those startup myths then. What
Yeah.
about, what about the one about if it ain't broke, don't fix it?
Yeah. So I'll just start by prefacing this. So in our book, Startup Different, we actually bust over 33 different startup myths that we were actively confronted with, like things that actually happened to us. And we write about that in the book. And I say we because my co-founder was actually also my co-author. We just keep working together. It's always a family business. But the first one, yeah, that you mentioned there is a good one. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
Yeah.
so that's basically as your company's growing, one thing that's kind of surprising is that, there's that old saying, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the problem with that is that it's a bit of a misnomer in sort of the business space, but particularly for software businesses. Because this funny little thing happens with software, which is that over time it breaks. And there will be parts of your system that are really reliant on that original thing, that really old, what we call legacy code. This can be true though for basically any product, but in our case, obviously, I'm specifically talking about software. And so we actually had this kind of crazy thing happen to us where, so we were a mobile code first company, so we built mobile apps primarily, and we had a message from basically our upstream provider. So you code on a platform, and our coding platform, they said to us, hey, bad news, we're shutting it down in 8 months. And you might be like, well, 8 months is a lot of time, whatever. But the issue is that we had millions of lines of code, and you can't have code on an unsupported platform. That's just a non-starter. It's going to break, and you're going to be in big trouble. So it was this mad dash over the next 8 months to sort of figure out how can we relaunch basically our entire platform. We rewrote everything we had done. And we were probably about 8 years into the business by that point. So it was 8 years worth of work we had to rewrite. And it was very, very stressful. We did actually pull it off, and we actually were able to elevate as well. We kind of took what we were doing before and tried to make it a little bit better as we launched it to our customers. But it was one of those things where it was just so easy to be like, oh, let's ignore this thing. We kind of had a sense that this might be happening, that they might be shutting down. But we were like, I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Let's ignore it. Let's push to other things. Let's worry about other priorities. And it really bit us in the bum. And this is one of those things, too, that big companies don't do very well either. Big companies just have so much code, and they get so, like, over time, they just get so caught up in these legacy code issues that they become unable to innovate. They effectively have to manage their existing code and its breakingness all the time, all the different things that break in it. And they don't have the ability to do new and exciting stuff, which ultimately will cause their position in the market to be less strong. So it's kind of one of those things where you really need to be on top of what's called your tech debt. And that's one really big thing that surprises a ton of founders, particularly as they achieve a certain level of scale.
Thank you for that. And I suppose there's that kind of tension with the staff as well when you're actually growing, isn't it? Because the culture is no longer the founder's culture, it's the our culture, and that may well turn out to be quite different.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge as well. One of the things that we did really wrong early on was that we had what's called a culture failure. And so we actually tried to build our culture based off of another startup. And so we looked around, and this is a long time ago, but back in, I want to say like 2009, Netflix came out with this PowerPoint deck that was just called Culture. And it was all about the Netflix culture. And my co-founder and I were like, well, we want to be a unicorn, right? So let's go and do this. So we try to adopt that Netflix culture. We tried to do it at our company, and it totally fails. We actually had all of our staff leave. Now, we weren't a huge company back then, but having a mass exodus is one of those moments where you go, wow, are we still a company? Are we still doing this? And that was pretty scary. And I think as we grew over time, one of the things that we realized is that business school teaching will get you to focus on people as resources. But I think in reality, what you need to do is you need to focus on people as people. You need to invest in them. You need to be empathetic with them. You need to work with them and collaborate. And once we did that, we got way better. We got way better results. First off, we had a really healthy culture. It was fun to come to work. We had a good time. We were serious when it mattered, but we could joke around too. We trusted each other. We believed in each other, and it showed off in the market. We were acquiring new customers at rates we'd never had before. Our customer service was better. The code we were producing was more reliable and frankly fun. And so it was just one of those things where having that culture was super important. And that's another myth, though, that founders, they really miss, that you need to be really deliberate about creating your culture. It may just form itself, but it may form in ways that you don't like. So you need to be invested and working on your culture on the regular.
I like that. I like that in the sense that it could form in a way you don't like. And I think people forget that. They think rather than doing the culture, we'll just leave it and somehow it will be right. But realizing actually that's probably not going to be how it works.
Yeah, or just manifest in a way that maybe isn't most productive or isn't consistent with your vision as a founder for the company, right? And I think it becomes one of those things that you need to really invest in it. It's actually, I can't remember exactly where I read this, but I know that there was a survey done of, I think it was over 150 different founders, and they asked them to prioritize the different needs of the company. And so of their particular firms. So, and it was like, sales and, marketing needs and, development and technology, or like, R&D. And then on that list was also culture. And most of the founders ranked it last. And the funny thing is if you look at the data, almost everything points to the stronger the culture you have, the better everything else is. And that you should actually go to culture first before going to all the other different sort of functional areas of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. All right then. So thank you for that. That was really useful to hear that. What about what's been classed as a crisis of credibility when you own your own business?
Yeah. So one of the things I remember really well when I started my company, especially in the early days, but it actually ended up being consistent all the way through, was that a lot of people would come up to me and sort of suggest that we weren't like the real deal, that we weren't a legitimate business. And that's really difficult because I think there's a lot of different pressures as a founder. Obviously, there's kind of the pressure to make money so that you can make a living at this. But then there comes like you want to make sure you're making impact and you're delivering and you're satisfying your customers and doing all those kinds of things. And it can be very, very challenging to deal with essentially the pop culture notions of what a startup ought to be. So, for example, and this is part of the reason we wrote the book too, we wanted to tell people that you can basically have your business your own way. You don't need to follow these pop culture myths. But a good example for a lot of firms is like, do I need to go and get funding? And a lot of the data around funding is not as clear cut as you would think. Like businesses that get funding fail almost as often as those that don't. And there's a whole bunch of other strings attached to it that make it sort of a terrible situation. And so you have to wonder, like, why do we keep doing this? And the reason is psychological pressure. People will come up to you and say, how much money have you raised if you have a startup? And it was tough to be like, well, actually, we're bootstrapping. I advise people in the book to respond with, well, actually, we don't have anything raised, but we're profitable and we have this many employees. Like, focus on other things that are actually meaningful. And when you start to buy into this hype, these startup myths, the mythology around startup, sometimes people call it the startup BS, then you start to make decisions that aren't optimal. In fact, they're actively, in some cases, bad for your business because you just think that's what you ought to be. And I always say to people, don't pursue validation among your peers. Pursue validation in the market. Focus on profitability, focus on the things that will actually make you a more legit business. And that'll help you sort of navigate the minefield of these various startup myths that can really send your company in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because it's not just startups, is it? It's all sorts of founders of businesses. Specifically, especially as well, I think service businesses. So people who've had a really senior position in corporate and come out and then don't believe that they can do what they need to do. I mean, I've seen it a lot where, I don't know, someone has had a corporate job. Within that job, they've been coaching at a very high level within that role, that they set up on their own, and then suddenly believe that they can't, even though they've been coached, coaching CEOs for like decades, all of a sudden they can't do anything because they haven't got a coaching qualification or something like that. And you're like, but you don't need a qualification because you've actually been doing it.
Yeah, you've been doing it and you didn't even know it, you know? Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And I think in some respects, especially something like coaching, if you've done it in an organization, in some respects it's more real because you'll lose your job if you get it wrong. So like it's an instant, you lose credibility, you lose reputation. If you're rubbish at it, people are going to know pretty quickly. You can't escape. So I don't know why there's such a credibility gap, I think, for these types of things, very similar to startups, like you said.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think it's easy for people to take you for granted. And I think it's easy for anyone starting something new to listen to those voices, or listen to that feedback that I don't think is always necessarily fair. We got tons of feedback in our early days because, you ask people, what do you think of this? We're trying to do this with the business, or I'm trying to do this with my career or whatever. And, there's a lot of motivations as to what people will tell you. And in some cases, it's not always super nice. I'm Canadian, so we're always thinking about being nice. But so I think it's just kind of one of those things where, you have to sort of recenter yourself and think about what is it that I'm good at? What are these strengths that I have? What can I do, in downstream effort to deliver? And what do I know to be true? And I think if you focus on, those strengths and the things that you've accomplished, you can do it. You are legit. And the same for the startup founders. Like if you're out there and you have paying customers and you're solving a difficult problem for them and they're delighted with how you're doing it, you're a legit business, no matter what anybody says.
Yeah, I love that. All right, then. So before we get to a close, and I know you've written the book, is there a favourite myth that you've enjoyed busting?
Yeah, there's one I really like. And it's kind of funny. So the myth is the alpha myth. Okay, so you hear this all the time in business. The alpha is like the dominant whatever, and it's based on obviously sort of basically a troop of chimpanzees, where like the leader of the troop is the alpha, right? I can go really deep into who actually came up with this, who put this out there and all that, but it doesn't really matter. The long story short of it is everybody kind of pictures like a really strong, powerful monkey that kind of muscles their way around and everybody respects them and fears them. And the reality is that actually in nature, surprisingly, is that that's not actually true. So in nature, the alpha chimps are often actually the most empathetic. They are often the bridge builder. They're often coalition builders because, having a strong coalition is more powerful than one really strong monkey. And they even found the ones that lead by fear are more likely to actually be sort of deposed, so to speak. So, and I thought this was really interesting because when you translate that to business pretty quickly, like everybody can think of the business alpha, the people that run around the office, they're kind of intense, that shout you down in a meeting. And like this happens in corporate world as in startup worlds, it's everywhere. And I think the funny thing is we're just flat wrong. Like if you actually want to be a true alpha, you're actually an empathetic leader. You're an effective communicator. You're an ally. You're out there learning more and investing in your people. And the results speak for themselves. If you are an empathetic leader, the data shows that your firm is absolutely more profitable. And it's because people are more productive. People are happier in their jobs. People are less likely to leave their jobs. And that's really important, I think, in this universe of sort of that 2-year limit, revolving door, LinkedIn sort of recruiter zone, that people are always kind of looking for new jobs. So this element of, you have your people are more invested, they're more they're more productive. And at the end of the day, your business is better off. And it's also, I would say too, one of those things that becomes a foundational part of your culture. It sort of trickles down. that, empathy is one of those things that if the leadership is showing the direction for this, like how to lead with empathy, to care about their people, that's going to translate down to middle management all the way down to employees sort of in the trenches. And I think that's really, really important. And it was a very fun myth to bust because it's a hilarious chapter anyway in the book. But it's also just one of those things that it feels so obvious. Like, of course, it has to be true, but somebody has to say it. So I'm happy to report that leading with empathy is what an actual alpha is, and that it's good for your business.
Yeah, because aggression and coercion can only last for so long.
Correct.
And quite ironically, primates are, that's what they're known for, isn't it? They're known for being a collective that kind of survives through, love and understanding. It's what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit funny, really, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it was funny to write because it was like, wow, we totally got this wrong. So
make sure that we understand what your book's called, because you said it's super fast last time. What?
Oh, sorry. It's Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business. And you can find it on Amazon and all the other major online retailers. It's available now, so I do encourage you to check it out. There's also an audiobook version and an ebook if that's what you're interested in. And we do also, for what it's worth, also have a podcast called Startup Different. So if you'd like to hear more about these ideas, you can check that out too.
Brilliant, thank you. And can people get something from your book if they're not multi-million?
Yes, I think there's plenty of useful applications of the book for sure.
Oh, I've got one more question.
Oh yeah.
Did you change anything about yourself from selling your business to starting up a new one?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, you learned a lot of lessons. I learned a lot of lessons going through it the first time, things that I'm not going to make mistakes on. And I think even in writing the book now, it has reinforced a lot of the principles to me that made us successful in the first place. So I think what it is the book itself was a very effective like debrief of like understanding the past 10 years. Right. And I think now going back into business, it's been a very, very valuable tool.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, David, for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Judith. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.